Well, I wanted to take some time to record and to begin reading, believe it or not, uh, an essay by one Henry Munn called The Mushrooms of Language in a book by Michael Harner called Hallucinogens and Shamanism. And so that's what we're going to be doing. Edited by Michael Harner, I should say. It's an anthology. When was it published? It was published in 1973. So it's a 40-page essay, so I'm probably not going to get through it tonight. But the mushrooms of language, Henry Munn. The Mazatec Indians eat the mushrooms only at night in absolute darkness. It is their belief that if you eat them in the daylight, you will go mad. The depths of the night are recognized as the time most conducive to visionary insights into the obscurities, the mysteries, the perplexities of existence. Usually, several members of a family eat the mushroom together. It's not uncommon for a father, mother, children, uncles, and aunts to all participate in these transformations of the mind that elevate consciousness onto a higher plane. The kinship relation is thus the basis of the transcendental subjectivity that Husserl said is intersubjectivity. The mushrooms themselves are eaten in pairs, a couple representing man and woman that symbolizes the dual principle of procreation and creation. Then they sit together in their inner light, dream and realize, and converse with each other. Presences seated there together, their bodies immaterialized by the blackness, voices from without, their communality. Then they sit together in their inner light, dream and realize, and converse with each other. Presences seated there together, their bodies immaterialized by the blackness, voices from without, their communality. In a general sense, for everyone present, the purpose of the session is a therapeutic catharsis. The chemicals of transformation, of revelation that open the circuits of light, vision, and communication, called by us mind manifesting, were known to the American Indians as medicines, the means given to men to know and to heal, to see and to say the truth. Among the Maztecs, many, one time or another during their lives, have eaten the mushrooms, whether to cure themselves of an ailment or to resolve a problem. But it is not everyone who has a predilection for such extreme and arduous experiences of the creative imagination, or who would want to repeat such journeys into the strange, unknown depths of the brain very frequently. Those who do are the shamans, the masters, whose vocation it is to eat the mushrooms, because they are the men of the spirit, the men of language, the men of wisdom. They are individuals recognized by their people to be expert in such psychological adventures. And when the others eat the mushrooms, they always call to be with them as a guide, one of those who is considered to be particularly acquainted with these modalities of the spirit. The medicine man presides over the session, for just as the Mazatec family is paternal and authoritarian, the liberating experience unfolds in the authoritarian context of a situation in which, rather than being allowed to speak or encouraged to express themselves, everyone is enjoined to keep silent and listen while the shaman speaks for each of those who are present. As one of the early Spanish chroniclers of the New World said, they pay a sorcerer who eats them, the mushrooms, and tells them what they have taught him. He does so by means of a rhythmic chant in full voice. The Maztecs say that the mushrooms speak. If you ask a shaman where his imagery comes from, he's likely to reply, I didn't say it, the mushrooms did. No mushroom speaks. That is a primitive anthropomorphization of the natural. Only man speaks, but he who eats these mushrooms, if he is a man of language, becomes endowed with an inspired capacity to speak. The shamans who eat them, their function is to speak. They are the speakers who chant and sing the truth. They are the oral poets of their people, the doctors of the word, they who tell what is wrong and how to remedy it, the seers and the oracles, the ones possessed by the voice. It is not I who speak, said Heraclitus. It is the Logos. Language is an ecstatic activity of signification. Intoxicated by the mushrooms, the fluency, the ease, the aptness of expression one becomes capable of are such that one is astounded by the words that issue forth from the contact of the intention of articulation with the matter of experience. At times, it is as if one were being told what to say, for the words leap to mind, one after another, of themselves without having to be searched for, a phenomenon similar to the automatic dictation of the surrealists, except that here the flow of consciousness, rather than being disconnected, tends to be coherent, a rational enunciation of meanings. Message fields of communication with the world, others, and oneself are disclosed by the mushrooms. The spontaneity they liberate is not only perceptual, but linguistic, the spontaneity of speech, of fervent, lucid discourse, of the logos in activity. For the shaman, it is as if existence were uttering itself through him. For the shaman, it is as if existence were uttering itself through him. From the beginning, once what they've eaten has modified their consciousness, they begin to speak, and at the end of each phrase, they say, so, says in their language, like a rhythmic punctuation of the said. Says, says, says. It is said, I say, who says, we say, man says, language says, being in existence, say. There's a footnote. The inspiration produced by the mushrooms is very much like that described by Nietzsche in, I don't know how to pronounce that. Is it I human, esse homo? Since the statement of Rimbaud, I is another, spontaneous language, speaking or writing as if from dictation, to use the common expression for an activity very difficult to describe in its truth, has been of paramount interest to philosophers and poets. Says the Mexican Octavio Paz in an essay on Brayton, quote, the inspired one, the man who speaks truth, does not say anything that is his. From his mouth speaks language. It goes on. Actually, this is so good. Cross-legged on the floor in the darkness of huts close to the fire, breathing the incense of copal, the shaman sits with the furrowed brow and the marked mouth of speech. Chanting his words, clapping his hands, rocking to and fro, he speaks in the night of chirping crickets. What is said is more concrete than ephemeral phantasmagoric lights. Words are materializations of consciousness. Language is a privileged vehicle for our relation to reality. Language is a privileged vehicle of our relation to reality. Let us go looking for the tracks of the spirit, the shamans say. Let us go to the cornfield looking for the tracks of the spirit's feet in the warm ground. So then let us go walking ourselves along the path in search of significance, following the words of two discourses, and registered like tracks on magnetic tapes, then translated from the native tonal language to discover and explicate what is said by an Indian medicine man and medicine woman during such ecstatic experiences of the human voice, speaking with rhythmic force the realities of life and society. The short, stout, elderly woman with her laughing moon face, dressed in a huipil, the long dress, embroidered with flowers and birds of the Mazatec women, a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her grey hair parted down the middle and drawn into two pigtails, golden crescents hanging from her ears, bent forward from where she knelt on the earthen floor of the hut, and held a handful of mushrooms in the fragrant, purifying smoke of copal rising from the glowing coals of the fire to bless them. Known to the ancient Mesoamericans as the flesh of God, called by her people the blood of Christ. Through their miraculous mountains of light and rain, the Indians say that Christ once walked. It is a transformation of the legend of Quetzalcoatl, and from where dropped his blood, the essence of his life. From there the holy mushrooms grew, the awakeners of the spirit, the food of the luminous one, flesh of the world, flesh of language. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. In the beginning there was flesh, and the flesh became linguistic. Food of intuition, food of wisdom. She ate them, munched them up, swallowed them and burped, rubbed ground up tobacco along her wrists and forearms as a tonic for the body, extinguished the candle, and sat waiting in the darkness where the incense rose from the embers like glowing white mist. Then after a while came the enlightenment and the enlightenment, and all at once, out of the silence, the woman began to speak, to chant, to pray, to sing, to utter her existence. My God, you who are the master of the whole world, what we want is to search for and encounter from where comes sickness, from where comes pain and affliction. We are the ones who speak and cure and use medicine. So without mishap, without difficulty, lift us into the heights and exalt us. From the beginning, the problem is to discover what the sickness is the sick one is suffering from and prognosticate the remedy. Medicine woman, she eats the mushrooms to see into the spirit of the sick, to disclose the hidden, to intuit how to resolve the unresolved, for an experience of revelations. The transformation of her everyday self is transcendental and gives her the power to move in the two relevant spheres of transcendence in order to achieve understanding. That of the other consciousness, where the symptoms of illness can be discerned, and that of the divine, the source of the events in the world. Together with visionary empathy, her principal means of realization is articulation, discourse, as if by saying she will say the answer and announce the truth. Quote, it is necessary to look and think in her spirit where it hurts. I must think and search in your presence where the glory is. My Father, who art the master of the world, where does this sickness come from? Was it a whirlwind or bad air that fell in the door or in the doorway? So are we going to search and to ask from the head to the feet what the matter is? Let's go searching for the tracks of her feet to encounter the sickness that she is suffering from. Animals in her heart? Let's go searching for the tracks of her feet, the tracks of her nails, that it be alleviated and healed where it hurts. What are we going to do to get rid of this sickness? For the Maztecs, the psychedelic experience produced by the mushrooms is inseparably associated with the cure of illness. The idea of malady should be understood to mean not only physical illness, but mental troubles and ethical problems. It is when something is wrong that the mushrooms are eaten. If there is nothing the matter with you, there is no reason to eat them. Until recent times, the mushrooms were the only medicine the Indians had recourse to in times of sickness. Their medicinal value is by no means merely magical, but chemical. According to the Indians, syphilis, cancer, and epilepsy have been alleviated by their use, tumors cured. They have empirically been found by the Indians to be particularly effective for the treatment of stomach disorders and irritations of the skin. The woman whose words we're listening to, like many, discovered her shamanistic vocation when she was cured by the mushrooms of an illness. After the death of her husband, she broke out all over with pimples. She was given the mushrooms to see whether they would help her, and the malady disappeared. Since then, she's eaten them on her own and given them to others. If someone is sick, the medicine man is called. The treatment he employs is chemical and spiritual. Unlike most shamanistic methods, the Mazatec shaman actually gives medicine to his patients. By means of the mushrooms, he administers to them physiologically. At the same time, he alters their consciousness. It is probably for psychosomatic complaints and psychological troubles that the liberation of spontaneous activity provoked by the mushrooms is most remedial. Given to the depressed, they awaken a catharsis of the spirit. To those with problems, a vision of their existential way. If he hasn't come to the conclusion that the illness is incurable, the medicine man repeats the therapeutic sessions 3 times at intervals. He also works over the sick, for his intoxicated condition of intense, vibrant energy gives him a strength to heal that he exercises by massage and suction. His most important function, however, is to speak for the sick one. The Mazatec shamans eat the mushrooms that liberate the fountains of language to be able to speak beautifully and with eloquence, so that their words, spoken for the sick one and those present, will arrive and be heard in the spirit world, from which comes benediction or grief. The function of the speaker, nevertheless, is much more than simply to implore. The shaman has a conception of poesis in its original sense as an action. Words themselves are medicine. To enunciate and give meaning to the events and situations of existence is life-giving in itself. To enunciate and give meaning to the events and situations of existence is life-giving in itself. And there's a footnote on poesis. The Greek word which signifies poetry was employed by the writer of an alchemical papyrus to designate the operation of transmutation itself. What a ray of light! One knows that the word poetry comes from the Greek verb which signifies make. But that does not designate an ordinary fabrication except for those who reduce it to verbal nonsense. For those who have conserved the sense of the poetic mystery, poetry is a sacred action. That is to say, one which exceeds the ordinary level of human action. Like alchemy, its intention is to associate itself with the mystery of the primordial creation. That's quoted from Michel Caroux. Anyway, the psychoanalyst listens, whereas the shaman speaks, points out Levi-Strauss, who's quoted, when a transference is established, the patient puts words into the mouth of the psychoanalyst by attributing to him alleged feelings and intentions. In the incantation, on the contrary, the shaman speaks for his patient. He questions her and puts into her mouth answers that correspond to the interpretation of her condition. A prerequisite role, that of listener for the psychoanalyst and of orator for the shaman, establishes a direct relationship with the patient's conscious and an indirect relationship with his unconscious. This is the function of the incantation proper. The shaman provides the sick woman with a language by means of which unexpressed and otherwise inexpressible psychic states can be immediately expressed. And it is the transition to this verbal expression, at the same time making it possible to undergo in an ordered and intelligible form a real experience that would otherwise be chaotic and inexpressible, which induces the release of the physiological process. That is, the reorganization in a favorable direction of the process to which the sick woman is subjected. I'm going to repeat that sentence. And it is the transition to this verbal expression, at the same time making it possible to undergo in an ordered and intelligible form a real experience that would otherwise be chaotic and inexpressible. It is the transition to this verbal expression which induces the release of the physiological process. That is, the reorganization in a favorable direction of the process to which the sick woman is subjected. These remarks of the French anthropologist become particularly relevant to Mazatec shamanistic practice when one considers that the effect of the mushrooms used to make one capable of curing is to inspire the shaman with language and transform him into an oracle. That come all the saints, that come all the virgins, chants the medicine woman in her sing-song voice, invoking the beneficent forces of the universe, calling to her the goddesses of fertility, the virgins, fertile ones, because they have not been sowed, and are fresh for the seed of men to beget children in their wombs. The Virgin of Conception and the Virgin of the Nativity, that Christ come and the Holy Spirit, 53 saints, 53 saintesses, that they sit down at her side on the mat, on her bed, to free her from sickness. The wife of the man in whose house she was speaking was pregnant, and throughout the session of creation, from the midst of Genesis, her language as spontaneous as her being that has begun to vibrate. She concerns herself with the emergence of life, with the birth of an existence into that everyday social world that her developing discourse expresses. The wife of the man in whose house she was speaking, the wife of the man in whose house she was speaking, was pregnant, and throughout the session of creation, from the midst of Genesis, and throughout the session of creation, from the midst of Genesis, her language as spontaneous as her being that has begun to vibrate, she concerns herself with the emergence of life, with the birth of an existence into that everyday social world that her developing discourse expresses. With the baby that is going to come, there is no more suffering. There is no suffering, says. It's a matter of a moment. There isn't going to be any suffering, says. From one moment to another, it will fall into the world, says. From one moment to another, we're going to save her from her woe, says. That her innocent creature come without mishap, says. Her elf. That is what it is called when it is still in the womb of its mother. From one moment to another, that her innocent creature, her elf come, says. We are going to search and question, she says, untie and disentangle. She is on a journey, for there is distanciation, and going there somewhere without her even moving from the spot where she sits and speaks. Her consciousness is roaming throughout existential space. Sibyl, seer, and oracle, she is on the track of significance, and the pulsation of her being is like the rhythm of walking. Let us go searching for the path, the tracks of her feet, the tracks of her nails. From the right side to the left side, let us look. To arrive at the truth, to solve problems, and to act with wisdom, it is necessary to find the way in which to go. Meaning is intentional. Possibilities are paths to be chosen between. For the Indian woman, footprints are images of meaning, traces of a going to and from, sedimented clues of significance to be looked for from one side to the other and followed to where they lead, indicators of directionality, signs of existence. The hunt for meaning is a temporal one, carried into the past and projected into the future. What happened? She inquires. What will happen? Leaving behind for what is ahead go the footprints between departure and arrival. manifestations of human existential ecstasis. And the method of looking from the right side to the left side is the articulation of now this intuition, fact, feeling, or wish, now that the intention of speaking, bringing to light meanings, whose associations and further elucidations are like the discovery of a path where the contents to be uttered are tracks to be followed into the unexplored, the unknown and unsaid, into which she adventures by language, the seeker of significance, the questioner of significance, the articulator of significance, the significance of existence that signifies with signs by the action of speaking the experience of existence. Woman of medicines and cure, who walks with her appearance and her soul, sings the woman, bending down to the ground and straightening up, rocking back and forth as she chants, dividing the truth in time to her words, emitter of signs. She is the woman of the remedy and the medicine. She is the woman who speaks, the woman who puts everything together, doctor woman, woman of words, wise woman of problems. She is not speaking most of the time for any particular person, but for everyone, all who are afflicted, troubled, unhappy, puzzled by the predicaments of their condition. Now, in the course of her discourse, ushering realities, not hallucinations, talking of existence in a communal world where the we is more frequent than the I, she comes to a more general sickness and aggravation than physical illness. The economic condition of poverty in which her people live. Let us go to the cornfield, searching for the tracks of the feet, for her poorness and humility. That the gold and silver come, she prays. Why are we poor? Why are we humble in this town of Huautla? That is the paradox. Why, in the midst of such great natural wealth as their fertile, plentiful mountains, where waterfalls cascade through the green foliage of leaves and ferns, should they be miserable from poverty? She wants to know. The daily diet of the Indians consists of black beans and tortillas covered with red chili sauce. Only infrequently at festivals do they eat meat. White spots caused by malnutrition splotch their red faces. Babies are often sick. It's wealth she pleads for to solve the problem of want. The mushrooms, which grow only during the season of torrential rains, awaken the forces of creation and produce an experience of spiritual abundance, of an astonishing, inexhaustible constitution of forms that identifies them with fertility and makes them a mediation, a means of communion, of communication between man and the natural world, of which they are the metaphysical flesh. The theme of the shamaness, mother and grandmother, woman of fertility, bending over as she chants and gathering the earth to her, as if she were collecting with her hands the harvest of her experience, is that of giving birth, is that of growth. Agriculturalists, they are people of close family interrelationships and many children. The clusters of Neolithic thatched-roofed houses on the mountain peaks are of extended family groups. The woman's world is that of the household. Her concern is for her children and all the children of her people. All the family, the babies and the children, that happiness come to them, that they grow and mature without anything befalling them, free them from all classes of sickness that there are here in the earth, without complaint and with goodwill, she says. So will come well-being, will come gold. Then we will have food, our beans, our gourds, our coffee. That is what we want. That come a good harvest, that come richness, that come well-being for all of our children, all my shoots, my children, my seeds, she sings. But the world of her children is not to be her world, nor that of their grandfathers. Their indigenous society is being transformed by the forces of history. Until only recently, isolated from the modern world, The Indians lived in their mountains as people lived in the Neolithic. There were only paths, and they walked everywhere they went. Trains of burros carried out the principal coffee, to the markets in the plain. Now roads have been built, blasted out of rock, and constructed along the edges of the mountains over precipices to connect the community with the society beyond. The children are people of opposites. Just as they speak two languages, Mazatec and Spanish, they live between two times. The timeless, cyclical time of recurrence of the people, of the deer, and the time of progress, change, and development of modern Mexico. In her discourse, no stereotyped rite or traditional ceremony with prescribed words and actions, speaking of everything, of the ancient and the modern, of what is happening to her people, the woman of problems, peering into the future, recognizes the inevitable process of transition, of disintegration and integration that confronts her children. The younger generation destined to live the crisis and make the leap from the past into the future. For them, it is necessary to learn to read and to write and to speak the language of this new world, and in order to advance themselves, to be educated and gain knowledge contained in books radically different from the traditions of their own society, whose language is oral and unwritten, whose implements are the hoe, the axe, and the machete. Quote, also, a book is needed, says, good book of good reading in Spanish, says, in Spanish, all your children, your creatures, that their thought and their custom change, says, for me there is no time. Without difficulty, let us go, says, with tenderness, with freshness, with sweetness, with goodwill. Don't leave us in darkness or blind us, she begs the origins of light. Don't leave us in darkness or blind us, she begs the origins of light. For in these supernatural modalities of consciousness, there are dangers on every hand of aberration and disturbance. Let us go along the good path, the path of the veins in our blood, the path of the master of the world. Let us go in a path of happiness. The existential way, the conduct of one's life, is an idea to which she returns again and again. The paths she mentions are the moral, physical, mental, emotional qualities typical of the experience of animated conscious activity, from the midst of which spring her words: goodness, vitality, reason, transcendence, joy. Goodness, vitality, reason, transcendence, joy. Seated on the ground in the darkness, seeing with her eyes closed, her thought travels within, along the branching arteries of the bloodstream, and without across the fields of existence. There is a very definite physiological quality about the mushroom experience, which leads the Indians to say that by a kind of visceral introspection, they teach one of the workings of the organisms. They teach one of the workings of the organism. It is as if the system were projected before one into a vision of the heart, the liver, lungs, genitals, and stomach. In the course of the medicine woman's discourse, it is understandable that she should, from astonishment, from gratitude, from the knowledge of experience, say something about the mushrooms that have provoked her condition of inspiration. In a sense, to speak of the mushroom experience is a reification as absurd as the anthropomorphization of the mushrooms when it is said that they talk. The mushrooms are merely the means, in interaction with the organism, the nervous system, and the brain, of producing an experience grounded in the ontological existential possibilities of the human, irreducible to the properties of a mushroom. The experience is psychological and social. What is spoken of by the shamaness is her communal world. Even the visions of her imagination must have their origin in the context of her existence and the myths of her culture. the subject of another society will have other visions and express a different content in his discourse. It would seem probable, however, that apart from emotional similarities, colored illuminations, and the purely abstract patterns of a universal conscious activity, between the experiences of individuals with differing social inherences, the common characteristic would be discourse. For judging by their effect, the chemical constituents of the mushrooms have some connection with the linguistic centers of the brain. So says the teacher of words, says the woman. So says the teacher of matters. It is paradoxical that the rediscovery of such chemicals should have related their effects to madness and pejoratively called them drugs, when the shamans who used them spoke of them as medicines and said from their experience that the metamorphosis they produced put one into the communication with the spirit. It is paradoxical that the rediscovery of such chemicals should have related their effects to madness and pejoratively called them drugs, when the shamans who used them spoke of them as medicines and said from their experience that the metamorphosis they produced put one into communication with the spirit. It is precisely the value of studying the use in so-called primitive societies of such chemicals that the way be found beyond the superficial to a more essential understanding of phenomena which we, with our limited conception of the rational, have too quickly, perhaps mistakenly, termed irrational, instead of comprehending that such experiences are revelations of a primordial existential activity, of, quote, a power of signification, a birth of sense, or a savage sense. That's quoted from Husserl in a footnote. Quote, in a sense, as Husserl says, philosophy consists of the restitution of a power of signification, a birth of sense or a savage sense, an expression of experience by experience, an expression of experience by experience, which particularly clarifies the special domain of language. Repeating that, as Husserl says, philosophy consists of the restitution of a power of signification, a birth of sense or a savage sense, an expression of experience by experience, which particularly clarifies the special domain of language. What are we confronted with by the shamanistic discourse of the mushroom eaters? A modality of reason in which the logos of existence enunciates itself, or by the delirium and incoherence of derangement, They are doing nothing but talk, says the medicine woman, those who say that these matters are matters of the past. They are doing nothing but talk, says the medicine woman, those who say that these matters are matters of the past. They are doing nothing but talk, the people who call them crazy mushrooms. They claim to have knowledge of what they do not have any experience of. Consequently, their contentions are nonsense. Nothing but expressions of the conventionality. The mushrooms explode by their discourse of the extraordinary. Mere chatter, if it weren't for the fact that the omnipotent they forms the force of repression which, by legislation and the implementations of authority, has come to denominate infractions of the law and the code of health, the means of liberation that once were called medicines. They are doing nothing but talk, says the medicine woman. Those who say that these matters are matters of the past. They are doing nothing but talk, the people who call them crazy mushrooms. They claim to have knowledge of what they do not have any experience of. Consequently, their contentions are nonsense, nothing but expressions of the conventionality. The mushrooms explode by their discourse of the extraordinary. Mere chatter, if it weren't for the fact that the omnipotent they forms the force of repression, which, by legislation and the implementation of authority, has come to denominate infractions of the law and the code of health, the means of liberation that once were called medicines. In a time of pills and shots of scientific medicine, the wise woman is saying the use of the mushrooms is not an anachronistic and obsolete vestige of magical practices. Their power to awaken consciousness and cure existential ills is not any the less relevant now than it was in the past. She insists that it is ignorance of our dimension of mystery, of the well springs of meaning, to think that their effect is insanity. Good and happiness, she says, naming the emotions of her activized, perceptualized being. Good and happiness, she says, naming the emotions of her activized, perceptualized being. They're not crazy mushrooms. They're a remedy, says. A remedy for decent people, for the foreigners, she says, speaking of us, wayfarers from advanced industrial society who have begun to arrive in the high plazas of her people to experiment with the psychedelic mushrooms that grew in the mountains of the Mazatec's. She has an inkling of the truth that what we look for is a cure of our alienations, to be put back in touch by violent means, if necessary, with that original creative self that has been alienated from us by our middle class families, education, and corporate world of employment. She has an inkling of the truth that what we look for is a cure of our alienations, to be put back in touch by violent means, if necessary, with that original creative self that has been alienated from us by our middle class families, education, and corporate world of employment. There in their land, it is taken account of that there is something in these mushrooms, that they are good, of use, she says. The doctor that is here in our earth, the plant that grows in this place. With this, we are going to put together, we are going to alleviate ourselves. It is our remedy. He that suffers from pain and illness, with this it is possible to alleviate him. They aren't called mushrooms. They are called prayer. They are called well-being. They are called wisdom. They are there with the Virgin, our mother, the Nativity. The Indians do not call the mushrooms of light mushrooms. They call them the holy ones. For the shamaness, the experience they produce is synonymous with language, with communication, on behalf of her people, with the supernatural forces of the universe, with plenitude and joyfulness, with perception, insight, and knowledge. It is as if one were born again. Therefore, their patroness is the goddess of birth, the goddess of creation. I'm going to pause there, continue later.